on my computer. All right. Shall we?
We should.
Woo!
Good morning. Welcome to the Dear Becky and Lizzie edition. Yay, got it right.
Yay, it's Thursday. Hello. I was watching Drunk History lately on YouTube, so now I have this urge to be like, hello, my name is Rebecca Smith, and today we're going to talk about, but I'm sober, so it's okay. I'm just tired. That whole, the getting drunk thing, that's not for me. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the owner of Sun Dragon Art and Fiber in clear and getting windy, not as windy as my house right now. The hurricane is coming for Brevard, North Carolina.
I'm Liz. I'm the minion there, looking at the umbrellas that are still up, flapping in the breeze.
They're starting to flap, but this is nothing compared to my house.
No.
Though. I was telling her earlier, this is like absolutely nothing. It's cold out. Look, I'm wearing a chunky sweater. Not even, I could have put that other one on. I grabbed one from the shelf where we put the things we don't have on display because I have too many things I've made. This is the hip stripe sweater or something like that.
Hip stripe. Yep.
I will try to get it in the description. The woman who wrote this pattern for chunky yarn, it's I made mine with Eco Plus Merino. We have these giant skeins of it, 200 grams. She did it with like color changing yarn or like slowly, or she did it with like lots of mini skeins maybe or something, where the stripes, like the thick stripes went in the opposite direction of the thin stripes, and I just picked two solids and I really love it. And it's a super easy top down raglan. But I was cold today, so I'm and when I go outside I'm probably gonna have to layer up.
Just so everybody knows, yesterday I wore sleeves. Today I wore sweater. It's my Ranunculus.
It's a thin sweater, but that she's wearing any sweater at all.
I'm wearing a sweater and flannel.
That's the kicker right there. Yeah, so it's chilly out. My watch says it's 48, which is warmer than when I left the house. Yeah, my cat was freaking out, like he was attacking me and also angry that I was leaving, and he's wigging out right now because the storm is coming.
A lot of knit faster. Winter is coming.
Yeah, right.
Too.
It's not going to be nearly as catastrophic here as it was down in Florida. Like I've seen pictures and hearing tales, and oh my gosh, we're gonna, like, there was debris in the road driving in today up in Conisty. All the loose stuff is blowing down.
Blowing out. Yeah.
Check social media, Instagram and Facebook if for some crazy reason we have to shut down. We're expecting wind and rain, which could mean we are perfectly fine and can maintain business for the next 2 days, or could mean not that the shop won't get flooded. I mean, I shouldn't say won't, but it'd be highly unlikely. Roads to and from the shop may become hazardous due to limbs of trees or potentially flooding, or trees. Yeah, it's more likely the routes that Liz and I take to work. It's more likely that if there are trees across the road, or if there's no power in town, that is why we would not be here, or we would go home early. Not so much that we can't, sorry, yarn tickling my nose. Not so much that we roads are impassable from between us and home because of water. That's got to be pretty bad, and we shouldn't get that much rainfall. We're thinking like the latest forecast, because it went over Florida and now it's gaining a little more moisture from the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Which is not as warm as the Gulf, but still
it's pretty warm.
It can still help the hurricane retain its shape. I've learned, I mean, I think you already knew it. I've learned so much about hurricanes since moving here. Like, I've lived on the East Coast and I've dealt with hurricanes, but further up north where I'm not paying attention as much. And now I'm just like, ooh. It's not like we live in Florida and we have to evacuate, but I mean, we have people here who evacuate from Florida to here because even though it's going to hit here, it's not going to be as bad as there. Yeah.
I think there might, like a couple years ago where we got two of them back to back, like within like less than a week of each other.
That was pretty bad.
That is where the ground is already saturated and the life gets
Usually
bad,
it's not,
but,
it's not quite that bad for us. Cause
yeah,
we're pretty
so-
far inland. It's a big state, but we'll still get walloped by it. Like some of the models you were showing us, and then we should get to questions. But some of
Yep.
the models Liz was sending me last night was like most of the moisture from the leftovers of Ian are going to be dumped on Western North Carolina, not South Carolina, not,
The-
you know, what is it?
any
Us.
the clouds that I saw last night
Uh-huh.
and any clouds that we see today are the outer bands of,
Oh, I'm sure.
like, I
The
keep pulling
wind
up the
overnight,
satellite.
I was like, this is the outer bands.
Yeah.
Like what I'm feeling at my house is what's coming. I looked at the satellite this morning. Yes. And
Yeah.
there's this thing that's close to us. It's not quite over us yet, but was really close to us. Anyway, topic of this show is supposed to be your questions about knitting and crocheting. I'm gonna try knitting like Liz does. We'll see how long I last. Look, what I'm doing kind of matches my sweater though, isn't that pretty?
Okay.
Alana's quick. Okay, what's
So
our question?
we have 3 questions today.
Trying to knit without looking so.
I am going to start at the bottom, and if we have time to move up one, great. If we don't,
Okay,
we'll hit
so
them
that's-
next week.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to do them in order that they got to me.
Okay,
So-
that's what I was wondering. Are
Yeah.
we going in order? Okay.
Yes. So the first question
Of received.
I've received, dear B&L, have you ever thought about just knitting swatches of new yarns instead of trying to complete so many projects? Your friend in Florida who starts fretting if she has more than one project on needles at a time.
I'm now remembering getting this question. So, in theory, swatches of all the yarns sounds like a fantastic idea because then we're not as invested in. My watch just decided that something I said was supposed to trigger Siri to start talking.
You said in theory.
In theory was the thing it logged. That's supposed to be like, I have times at home when I say seriously and it hears Siri. Yeah. Anyway. So in theory, doing swatches of yarns would be a wonderful idea. What this person probably means by a swatch is just a little rectangle, or maybe there's some garter and maybe there's some stockinette, and then you can feel how the yarn, like the one thing you can get out of that is feeling how the yarn knits up.
Yeah.
You can feel how soft or how not soft, because yarns are different when they're worked up versus when they are in the skein. They can feel very different. They can feel softer or rougher. It can go either way. So that in theory would be good. In practice, there's some challenges with this. I totally understand where this writer is coming from and the good intentions in their heart.
And in theory, swatches are faster than a project.
Yes.
So
So that's
yes.
another reason why that would be a good thing. Wouldn't take as long. Would be done. Bam. Awesome. In practice, there's some issues with I mean, I could find ways to use the leftovers. Like it's not a whole skein of yarn. It's sacrificing a skein of yarn. And yes, I'm sacrificing yarn for projects. I understand that. It's sacrificing a skein of yarn for low swatch, which mostly works to show people what happens with the yarn. So what I was about to say is sacrificing a skein of yarn. We could use the leftovers in like your minion bags and stuff. So we could be economical about it. But it doesn't show, it shows someone maybe how the yarn feels and potentially how the colors could knit up. With variegated yarns, it really becomes a challenge because the width of your swatch is not going to be the width of someone's project necessarily. And so it doesn't really give them a full idea of how it's going to knit up. Because if they knit something wider, and then they say, but this doesn't look like your swatch. So some people will be totally understanding about that and some people won't.
Especially with the color changing.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Like with this, a swatch could do the same thing as this does. Absolutely. What are you gonna say?
Yeah, the bigger problem
There's a few, but you know,
with doing swatches, especially with color changing yarn. With solid yarn, like even Michael's and Joann's and places will have a little
some of them do.
swatch.
Yeah.
But generally it's with the solids.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a color changing yarn, the biggest catch-22 is we have one swatch with color changing yarn, and then somebody picks up another ball and goes, do you have a swatch in this color?
Mhm.
Or
They want to see
this color?
how a specific color knits up. And sacrificing one ball of yarn per yarn is a hot maybe, but sacrificing one ball of every colorway is a hot no for me. You know, it's it might make a few knitters really, really happy. But then all the other knitters who need a sweater's quantity of yarn, and they need 10 balls, and we only have 9 because in the same dye lot, because we used one up for a swatch. Like, there's pros and cons, right? Another thing about making the whole samples is, I mean, then we have samples for the shop, and that does actually sell a lot of yarn of like, oh, I could make this out of that. Cool. And there are some people who, even if they had the swatch, they would say, but what do I do with it? Like, what can I make out of this? And
They want
might
the
not.
swatch and the sample.
Yes, and they might not make my sample. They might make something else. But so it's I understand where our writer is coming from, especially because there's a lot of projects I haven't finished. Let's be honest. I did finish some in the past week or so, but there's a lot that I haven't finished. And that's frustrating both me and the people probably who want to see the finished product in the shop. But the swatches have their own issues too. And I'm sure each shop has their own way of navigating that, whether they're like, the swatches are the key. Let's just do that. I know a lot of indie dyers who make swatches with their yarns to show off what will happen. And like Yarn Baby does crochet and knit swatches. And that's wonderful. I think for the yarn companies or indie dyers who that's their sole focus, that works. It's very challenging for us to sacrifice a whole skein of yarn and could throw off dye lots and stuff. It's like, yes, this is more than one skein of yarn, but then I will order to replace it, or some yarn companies will give me credit for samples just so I can replace the yarn. I don't think they'll give me credit for a swatch. No, but you know, in theory, good idea. In practice, not sure if we're going to implement it in the shop.
And with swatches and samples, like, you tend to thrive more if the pattern's complicated.
But I need some simple stuff for the shop.
You need simple stuff for the shop, but if you were to just do swatches, they're kind of boring. Like, let's be honest. They don't take as long. They don't take as long, but like, it would be, Rebecca would take home yarn to make samples and be like, oh, but look at this cable sweater. Like, and with doing samples, you can do all different sizes, or like hats or cowls, or, you know, like,
I'm kind of hitting 2 birds with one stone. Yeah. I'm making samples for the shop, and I'm showing off how the yarn looks when it's knit. Again, I'm not covering as many bases as all the colorways, right? But I have had times when I'm like, oh, this color, look at that sample I made. This color, look at that. And I don't have every color, and we've run out of space in the shop to put stuff up.
And but we lug back and forth quite a few of our projects. So when people are like, well, how does this knit up? We generally rummage through our bags and go, oh, look, we're working with it, or oops, we left it at the house, you know. But it is.
Yes, to all of that. So that's our answer of why not just do swatches. Honestly, it's one of those, you can't win either way. There's going to be people who are like, but I wanted blah blah blah. So even though that could appease some people or more people, there's also going to be people with other requests.
Well, and with the samples, we have more people coming in, walking around the store going, I'm just trying to get inspired by your samples, then hey, knit a swatch.
And
so
yeah, and even those people will say, yes, I wanted this, but not quite like that, or they won't find something amongst all the many samples I have here, and that's understandable too. So,
but it's, you know, it gives people ideas of how.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm just saying, we're not yarn. We're not going to make everyone happy. We're going to try. We're not going to make everyone happy. So, all right, what's next?
Next question.
I've almost made it across one whole row. Look at me
I
go.
flipped twice, I think. I'm still shorter than you are,
Yeah.
literally.
I was like, it's
and
not a
figuratively.
competition unless I'm winning.
And you're winning, so
No, I'm not winning in how many rows I'm getting done, but I'm winning in how
Not
far along the project.
Yes.
I'll pick the one I'm winning on. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Rebecca, or Liz and Rebecca. I hope you are both well. I love watching you each week and wish I lived near enough to visit.
So do we.
My question is about slipping the first stitch of a row, which I happen to be doing on this. So I was like,
I
"Oh,
am not doing it on
that's
mine, but yes.
the
Okay.
pattern called for it, and I had to figure it out."
And that's
Yeah. When making a shawl, for example, the first stitch of a row is often slipped, even when it is written in the pattern to knit the first stitch. I often hear or read that some slip the stitch instead. Why is this? What difference does it make at the beginning of a row? Also, is the slip stitch with yarn in front or even on a gartered row and passed to the back to continue? I have the answer for that.
I have the answer for that too.
And passed to the
That's
back
the advice.
to continue, or slipped with yarn behind, as
English problems? What? Reading problems?
reading problems. As often the pattern does not say. And finally, is it slipped as if to purl or to knit? Thank you so much in advance for any help you have to offer. Best wishes, the confused slipper.
Okay. Some of this will end up being personal preference, but we can talk about what we do or what we like to do, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well,
right.
I can show the difference between a slipped edge
And a knot.
and a knot.
Look, we can, because I'm not slipping and she is.
Well, if you look at my edge,
you have
this was slipped with the yarn in the back, and that's slipped with the yarn in the front.
and it depends on what type of stitch you're doing.
Yes.
How that's so. Yeah. I have the bumpies. I'm not slipping stitches, and I have the what I call the purl bumps. Knitting every row, you're gonna have fronts and backs of stitches, and I have the bumpies all along the edge of my shawl. And it's these towards this hand down here. She's got some bumpies, and that has to do with how you hold the yarn when you're slipping. But yeah, if you slip the first stitch of on the edge of every row, you'll get these nice, it gives you a cleaner, smoother edge because you don't have the purl bumps. Essentially is you only have like the V's running along the edge. If you just knit straight every single row, you're going to get the purl bumps on the edge. You're going to get these raised bumps on the edge, which for pieces when you're sewing them together and stuff, that can be perfect. That can be fantastic. You want that. Some people really, really, really want that nice clean edge, and the slip stitch keeps things. Sometimes the stitches become a little longer because they have to cross over 2 rows. But it can make a very clean edge.
I don't mind not having it.
Most of your papillons, you don't slip the stitch. I've done both on the papillon. Like the papillon's not written to have a slip stitch on the edge. But you can if you want. And the one that's hanging under the register, I did. The one that I'm working on right now, I'm not. So what Liz was referring to when she was showing me, she's like, oh, I put the yarn in front or in back, or I find that depends on where your yarn is hanging naturally when you turn around is the best way I can describe it.
Okay.
Like when you're knitting every row, your yarn is in back when you're knitting, when it's facing you. And when you finish the row and you turn it around, the yarn is now hanging in front. And if I put my yarn in back because I'm going to be knitting and I slip the stitch, the yarn's going to wrap around the outside of my edge, and it's going to make the bumpies that Liz had. If you keep the yarn where it naturally is, so like if I had ended this row with pearls and turned it around, my yarn would be in the back, and I'd want to keep it there to slip and keep going so it wouldn't wrap around the outside edge. This right now, the yarn is on the side away from the camera, it's facing me. So like what I do with the papillon and everything is I keep the yarn in front, and I'll get to how to slip in a second. I don't want to do too many things at once, but I keep the yarn in front where it naturally is, and I slip the stitch over, and then I will move the yarn between the needles to the back. So the yarn's not wrapping around the outside edge. it negates the whole purpose of having a slip stitch if the yarn wraps around the outside of your shawl. So the way to do that for me on say if I was doing Liz's pattern, mine I'm just knitting, so it naturally, let me put this back over here. I just finished knitting. If I'm going to go knit again, I'm going to pull the yarn to the back and just start knitting. Again, that helps create these purl bumps on the edge. But for my papillon, I would slip the first stitch and then move the yarn to the back. That makes the yarn, when you're moving the yarn between the needles in the middle of a row, you don't get any bumps, anything. It hides it. And that's part of what slipping and then moving the yarn where it needs to be. So say I finished the row with a purl stitch and I turn my work around and my yarn is hanging in the back, but I need to purl on the next row. Say it was like reverse garter or something. I would slip the stitch, leaving the yarn hanging whatever side it wants to hang on, and then move it where it needs to be. And that will keep my edge clean. So that's the best way I can think of to describe it.
Yeah.
Do you want to tackle the how to slip the stitch, knit or purl?
It's always purlwise, unless specified in the pattern.
See, some patterns will say do it knitwise, and do you know why, Liz?
Because it's just moving the legs of the stitch exactly over to the other needle, the same setup. If you move it knitwise, it flips the stitch a different direction.
For the way most people knit. And so the lingo of purlwise, people get it confused because then they're like, but I'm not purling. And it's like, So it's when you go into purl, you're just sticking your needle straight in like this. And then if you slip it over, it hasn't changed direction. The legs, what Liz is talking about with the legs, if you were going to look at the stitch as a loop, the right side of the loop is still in front, is how most people, there's combination knitting. There's some ways that people might have their loop situated in a different direction, but it's essentially, it's just sliding it over. So this is, again, you guys are looking at it from the back side, y'all, I should say. My New Englander side is showing. This is purlwise, and it's just sticking your needle straight in. It's even if I had to slip the opposite direction, purlwise, like this needle sticking in isn't necessarily a knit or a purl stitch, but what if I'm going to stick it straight in, and when I pause like this, it'll look, my needles are in the right place to do a purl stitch. I'm not actually going to do it. I'm not going to do anything with my yarn. But if I go to knit, I have to come over and come in this way. And even visually, you can see that's doing something different. And what it's going to do if I move the stitch over is it's going to flip the legs. So the left leg will be in front and the right leg will be in back. By legs, we mean the sides of the stitch. And some like, I think it was great that you said, depending on what the pattern tells you to do. If the pattern doesn't say anything, assume purlwise, assume we don't want to flip the stitch around. Some will actually say, like with yarn in back, slip the stitch knitwise, and it'll flip, like depending on what you're doing, that might give you your clean edge, but you have to be consistent with it. The other time, most of the time that a slip stitch, which has nothing to do with the edge of the shawl necessarily, most of the time a slip stitch won't be slipped purlwise, is doing a slip knit decrease. That I've seen all kinds of fun different ways to do an SSK, but the most traditional is to slip 2 stitches individually knitwise, because it flips where the legs are and how the stitches are going to stack on top of each other to lean in a different direction than a knit 2 together. So yes, if you don't have instructions or if you're adding this to a pattern, my advice would be, however the yarn is hanging, if it's front or back on the edge, when you start your row, leave it there, don't move it. Slip your stitch purlwise and then move the yarn where it needs to be between stitches, whether it's to the back to knit or keep it in front to purl, and carry on with your row.
If you're just adding it to both sides, like adding it, like the pattern doesn't call for it, you knit the last stitch and then flip.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
Oh, I'm you
don't have
only,
to slip both sides.
If you tried to slip both ends, on both sides, I'm only talking about the beginning of a row.
Yep.
End of the row is normal.
It was just
no,
clarifying.
Yes, but here's what would happen. Because I've had people say, do I slip the first and the last? If you slip the first and the last stitch on every single row, you would have one stitch on each side that would be trying to go the entire length of your shawl. You would very quickly find out it will not work. You will have, unless that stitch has like 6 yarn overs in it for the length of it, like you will end up with one very long stitch trying to travel up because you slip it and then turn around and you slip it again. And it will not work for the length of a giant shawl. So I agree with what Liz is saying. If you want a slip stitch edge on a shawl, especially if it's one that's not written for a slip stitch edge, you pick first stitch of every row or the last stitch of every row. I think it's much easier to add as the first stitch being slipped. Only one of those though. Slip the first stitch, complete the rest of the row as written, all the way to the last stitch through the last stitch. So that's my only hesitation when you were saying that is knit the last stitches. Depends on what the pattern's telling you.
Depends on, but if
work the last stitch as written.
Yeah.
And then flip it around and slip the first stitch. Yeah.
But if you're just doing garter, it, like
It'll be
if you're adding it to a shawl.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just clarifying what
I
you were clarifying.
Lots of clarification.
Well, but that's one of the benefits of having, like, not everyone's brain works the same way. So, and we may be more so in sync that we're going to miss what other people are trying to get us to clarify. We're going to be like, oh, of course that makes sense. But having the two of us means that, that we can help each other clarify for people whose brains think differently than hers or mine do, vice versa. We're still going to need questions to clarify even further. We only have about 12 minutes left before the shop needs to open. Do we have enough time to give justice to another question?
No.
Okay.
Because it is a discussion about stranded color work or other color works. So I don't think we have.
That's a teaser for next week. And October starts a stranded color work cowl, the Rebel Squirrels cowl. So I think it's kind of good to leave the stranded color work question till October, which will be next week. That's the teaser for y'all. We are going to talk about stranded color work next week. If you have a question for us to expound upon and give our thoughts on, then you can either write us a letter at Sun Dragon Art and Fiber, 35 South Broad Street, Brevard, North Carolina, 28712, or you can email
Liz at sundragonartandfiber.com.
And if you have questions for next week, we already have one, and we can keep adding to the queue to roll them out. It's funny, we have like dry spells where we're like, let's make up some fun things to talk about. I mean, we're not making up topics.
And we still have a few suggestions left. And
I know.
I
was finishing my thought that we have dry spells and then we have everybody ask questions and we love it, but then you have to wait for your answer. Yes. So, because we have other stuff to get ready for the day, and I'm already eyeing the umbrellas that no one at the restaurant is going to come deal with until noon. And we have to see how much the wind picks up before noon. So we have some prep work to do so that our lessons who might be too chilly and have to come in with masks anyway, aren't going to get impaled by umbrellas. So, but we love y'all. Thanks for the questions. I think that was a good, because I was waiting to talk about that, what to do at the beginning of the row, since I got through one row on camera. If you have questions about what we talked about, let us know, or comments or thoughts that might be different than ours. And that's wonderful. Variety is the spice of life. What did you think of both of us trying to knit while we talked? We'll see.
She talks with her hands. It's funny.
But I still managed to talk with my hands today. I didn't get much knitting done. Anyway, but that was kind of fun. I got a row done. Oh, so exciting.
Like, subscribe, ring the bell, all the fun stuff.
All the fun stuff.
Knit nights tomorrow night.
This is our last day of filming this week. So 7 to 9. I almost went 6 again. No. We have to go home and make dinner. 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern time in the US on Zoom with the shop phone number
828-877-3550
as the code to get in. Our next Sunday one is not for a couple weeks. It's going to be on October 16th. October 1st is this Saturday. It marks the beginning of our Trying to figure out where my thing is. The rebel squirrels. Let me see. It might be in here. It might. Yeah, it's. Maybe I'll actually work on my sample that's not done yet. I'm doing white squirrels. Oh, oh, oh. I think I lost a stitch marker at least.
Ooh.
That's okay. I'll just get another one. But my white squirrels, I got to keep going on this and actually finish it. Our first class on the rebel squirrels, I'll look for that later, was supposed to be Saturday, but deluge on the horizon. So I'm working to reschedule that. When I have suggested some thoughts, and the person taking the class has responded with a couple of thoughts. And when we pick our reschedule dates, I'll let you know in case you want to jump in on the class if you're local. So anyway, I think we're gonna go. So we're not frenetically setting up the shop as we usually are. But thank you all for watching and subscribing and all that good stuff. And we will see you next week. Okay. Bye. Somewhere around here,
There
there's
it
a
is.
tassel. What? Oh,
It looks
ooh.
like yarn fluff on the floor.
It's the little tassel stitch markers from Lantern Moon. And sometimes they get bent and look funny, but then if you get them damp, they reshape, I found. So anyway, see you later. Bye.